All right, so let's go ahead with this committee meeting. You have the agenda and other materials that are at the table over there. And anyone from the audience who wants to take an empty spot up here, feel free to do so. We don't mean to have any great divide. It's just this configuration. So there's some seats if you wish. All right, let's see who's here. So if I could just begin with introductions. I'll begin with me and move to the left. I'm Edward Martinez. I'm the faculty co-chair of this committee.
Bob Miller, administrative co-chair of the Enrollment Management Committee.
Walter, faculty English division.
Elmer, Dean of English, representing basic skills, I think.
I'm Chris Fennessy of the Associated Students.
Anna Ogaz, articulation.
Bob Bell. Do I need to give my affiliation?
That's okay.
Vice President of Student Learning Services and Interim Vice President of Instruction.
Shelley Gaskin, business division and CTE.
Ted Young, Dean of the Languages Division.
Lena Watterson, Secretary of Natural Sciences and Classified Senate Rep.
Beverly Tate, representing basic skills.
Okay, and I do want to point out that I've taken the liberty of inviting Dina Chase, who is the interim dean? Interim Associate Dean of Admissions and Registration. She is more than anyone going to be implementing what we decide upon in the enrollment management policy, so I think her insight and participation is critical, and we welcome having her here today. Before we continue, we had discussed having a second student representative. Is Simon, are you the second student representative?
No, they have yet to be appointed by the associate students.
Okay. All right, so we'll wait for that.
Yeah, but they will be by the next meeting.
Very
Absolutely.
good.
This should be this Wednesday.
Okay. And just to let you know, before we go on to item 2, that for item 4, the enrollment priorities policy, we did receive some last-minute recommended changes to the enrollment policy. They were sent to you this morning electronically, but there are paper versions up at the table along with the other items, and we'll get to those in just a few minutes. The second item on today's agenda is a presentation by Bob Miller on the Strategic Enrollment Management Planning Principles.
Okay, since I didn't know for sure if the PowerPoint stuff was going to be functioning or not. Okay,
that's what's on the screen. I don't know.
It's going to take some time. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Thanks, Tim. I'm going to pass out documents. Okay.
Thank you.
Technology to kick in here. Okay, so this is the Strategic Enrollment Management Planning Principles for 12-13. That was approved by the Board of Trustees at their March 7th meeting, which was just last Wednesday. So quickly, our funded FTES next year, based upon the 1,050 FTES reduction that we are projected to take as a result of the the state's fiscal crisis, will be $18,548. We are going to go back to the principles of scheduling or building our schedule based upon a maximum of no more than 2% over the funded FTES. So that would put us at about roughly another 370 FTES. As we go forward and we build the schedule, Dr. Bell, the deans, and the faculty will be building it based upon the following concepts. The first-year experience program and pathways will be a priority, and we can talk more about that as time allows. We will continue with this notion of the completion agenda as we've talked about in previous meetings. The graduation fund, that is the fund that Dr. Rocha and the board have established. Basically, the notion behind that is that we are working both internally and externally to raise external funds. And those funds at approximately $5,000 per course or per class would go to what's known as high-demand degree and transfer courses. So as that money comes in, we will mount those types of courses. We're going to maximize the enrollments per FTES, and what that means is that for each FTES that comes in, we're going to try to generate as many enrollments as possible as a result of that, using such strategies as LGI, working to fill every seat in every class, but we're going to maximize the enrollments that we get on a per-seat basis. So we're not really thinking in terms of sections any longer, we're thinking in terms of seats. And then finally, we're going to prepare a contingency plan for a trimester model, but as everyone knows, a trimester model is a working condition topic, and we're not sure exactly how all that will play out, but we are definitely going to try to work on some kind of a contingency plan for trimester, whether that would be for this year, next year, or any time into the future. The next thing I wanted to show you is not this one, because I have a better illustration of it. Pass out hard copies. This is a very interesting slide that we put together that basically, we look at the top line. Well, if you look on the left-hand side, we have enrollments. On the right-hand side, we have budget. And along the bottom, we have years, starting with 2006-07 all the way through 12-13. And what you see there is that we've had 180,000 seats or enrollments that have stayed somewhat consistent over the last several years. And you see the blue line represents what we call student success, or that would be the actual numbers of completers. So we had access of 180,000, and we've had success of somewhere around 130,000, and that's actually growing, and that's good, and there's a whole other discussion on what we call closing the gap, which at another time we'll have, in terms of how we close that gap. But the really interesting line is the available resources line, because basically what that is showing us is that from a budgetary point of view, our budget has gone from a peak of about $124 million, and it's gone consistently down. And in the 11-12 and projected 12-13 years, you can see we've kind of fallen off a cliff, so to speak. So the notion of maximizing enrollments on the basis of the income that we've got coming into the college becomes that much more critical as we go forward. And of course, the notion of closing the gap between the student access and success is a critical one, but that's another discussion, and there's other things that we're working on going forward. So in essence, those were the two things that I really wanted to share with you. The only other thing that may be of interest at this point, and this, by the way, is the closing the gap concept with the completion agenda, where we would propose to close the gap using these types of interventions. But as we move forward, this is kind of an intro to Dr. Bell when we get to that point. The summer would be about completer courses and FYE interventions, first-year experience interventions. And then the fall and the spring would be as you see here. Okay, so I think that's probably it for now. Questions,
Are there
comments?
questions? Amy?
Not really a question, but I know I asked you this before, Bob. I want to clarify that the proposal, and again, this is negotiable, for the trimester, that summer is not a regular 16, 17.
What's being discussed is more of a 12-week term, a semester, a 12-week term, but what's being talked about is that 12-week can be divided up however we would want it to be from the point of view of the deans and the faculty.
So the configuration is not determined, is that
Right.
right?
That's
Okay.
correct.
Dave?
That's fine.
Okay.
I think for the purposes of discussion right now, we're talking about 3 academic periods: a fall, a spring, a summer, or a summer, a fall, a spring. And how that gets labeled or what would happen with that would be the subject of negotiations and further discussion. Glenda.
Want to fill a receipt. Are we keeping the mind, or is everyone going to be getting by?
The answer is perhaps a combination of both. We do have normal closing numbers now. They're almost completed. They will be submitted up through CNI to the Academic Senate and to the administration.
These are new?
We have over 1,900 courses. At the moment, about 150 or so received adjustments. Those adjustments still need to be talked about. But even if the NCNs are set on the notion of putting as many bodies and seats as we possibly can, again, for the subject of discussions and negotiations, might be what can we do to try to make sure that we are able to do that. That's kind of where we are right now on that topic.
But I think to answer your question, are those being adjusted? Well, they're being implemented for the first time, the NCNs, and not all divisions have finished their work in terms of establishing those NCNs. That's still ongoing within CNI.
Right. And we anticipate we'll have that work done certainly by the end of this spring term, but probably within a month or 2 at the most. But thus far, I think we've just got 2 ENT and a few other outstanding ones, but we're getting very close to being done with that.
Kelly?
Daryl asked me, our acting division person asked me today, if census is defined by the state or by the local district. His point being that if you're talking about seats that didn't go filled, we did have a problem with that in trying to fill every seat because the census allow us to get ad codes in time, and also just the flux of students in those first 2 weeks. If it could be, he asked if it could be extended to the 3rd week because it went unfilled simply because students are still juggling time and money and so on.
Yeah. I think I'll let
wonder if Dr. Bell or Dina
exactly.
could answer that question.
Well, excuse me, my understanding that census is set by the state, and your census is determined based upon the term length of the class. So classes which are shorter in length, for example, class, that census date will be shorter. It's set based upon the term length of the class. Local, we do not have the ability to adjust that.
So it's set within Title V regulations? Okay. Any other questions or comments for Bob Miller? Okay. All right, so we're going on to the 3rd item, the summer schedule, and Dr. Bell is going to lead this discussion.
Ed. For summer 2012, some of this is, again, an extension of what Vice President Miller just talked about. I think as everyone here at the committee knows, the college is already over its enrollment cap, planned enrollment for the 2011-2012 academic year. So the summer schedule will be much smaller, if you will, in size than our previous summer schedule. We're anticipating 150 classes, and I want to emphasize 150 classes that will be offered for summer 2012. As Bob Miller just indicated, we're going to look to maximize the enrollments of those classes towards an agenda of completion for transfer, degree, and certificate completion. Now, enrollment succinctly stated as it differentiates from what we normally use as sections. And enrollment, for sake of discussion here, is a seat in a class. So again, for sake of discussion, if we were going to put 150 classes in place, and if each one of those classes had an NCN of 30, that would generate 4,500 enrollments, or basically chairs in which we could put students. Our job is to try to align those chairs or those enrollments to those classes, again, which are consistent with completion for transfer, degree, and certificate. That'll be our goal going into the summer. Those are going to be the guiding principles that Vice President Miller just shared going forward. Some of what we'll look to do for the summer will be an extension of what we're attempting to do in this special spring forward intersession, where we're going to try to identify as many students who are close to completion as possible who can't possibly benefit from spring forward, the special 12-week intersession that's coming up, and try to get as many of those students as possible in the classes for the spring intersession, which is upcoming. But again, the focus will be on maximizing enrollments, and we're going to look to maximize those enrollments again. It is also what Bob just mentioned through LGI and online courses, so we can maximize the costs of enrollment while increasing the access for students in the classes. So again, it's going to be about 150 classes, or sections, if you will, but more important, 150 classes, focused on completion for students and focused on maximizing access for students as well.
Okay, thank you. Short.
Questions?
All right. Questions, comments? Chris?
So you say it's absolutely going to be cut, and you obviously don't have a section number yet. I know that we've discussed previously the idea of cutting, we're going to have to front load the cuts into fall and summer for the next year. Do we have a number of how many sections between the two we should plan on reducing between summer and fall?
Well, Chris, the classes that will amount for summer, whatever FTS generated here is going to be FTS which will appear in our 2011-2012 total count. So it's going to differentiate itself from fall, because once we get past July 1st, which will be a date after most of the start date for our summer classes, that will be our 12-13 FTS count. So when we start talking about the application of those guiding principles, which Vice President Miller just showed, those will be more directly applicable to when we start mounting our fall class schedule going forward into 12-13. These courses are the goal for summer 2012, is to maximize our access for students while at the same time trying to hold as close as we can the NCNs, so that we dampen, if you will, our overage, if you will, for our FTS that we've already generated for 11-12.
So just to clarify, you're saying that the summer scheduling is not going to be part of the 12-13 academic year?
Yeah, summer scheduling is not part of 12-13 because, again, for purposes of how we mount our FTES, all FTS is generated from July 1st to June 30th within a fiscal year, if you will, or an academic year, counts towards that year. Now, we have the option of carrying it either way. We can carry FTS forward into the next year, maintaining the current year if it occurs during the summer. We're going to mount all this FTS in the current fiscal year.
And if I can just sort of say, in terms of the number of classes, because of our FTS reduction, we are talking about basically maximizing and mounting as strong a fall and spring as we possibly can. And then 150 of those classes will be in the summer, we know that, which will then allow us to mount as strong a fall as we can, subject to knowing what's going to happen. And we've talked about some numbers in the past. But at the end of the day, if we're talking classes, or to use the old term that we've been using, sections, there will be a lower number. There has to be, based upon where we are with the state funding. On the other hand, if we can maximize the number of enrollments in the whatever classes we mount, by virtue of the things that Dr. Bell and I and others have talked about, then as far as impact on students, that impact will be lessened, even though we're going to be mounting less classes. That's the game that we are playing right now, and I mean that very respectfully. We just got to get more out of less, given the situation we're in.
And one final clarification. So when you say classes, that is the equivalent of sections?
Yeah, it is, because it's, the one single component or unit is the class. And it's basically how many students can we get in that class. And some of this is subject to negotiations and what have you with the faculty association. But we're working on that.
Amy?
Okay, so the tallies for summer.
Going to pick up that discussion Wednesday morning.
And I would suggest you might even talk about fall a little bit on Wednesday morning too, right?
Correct.
Based upon where we are with that schedule.
Anna?
I have a concern about how transfer patterns will be prioritized when deans are making these decisions. We have a lot of transferable courses that aren't necessarily appearing on the general ed packages, but they are articulated for a major. So I, as the articulation officer and on behalf of students, I think we really need to talk about how those courses will be preserved so that when students apply to transfer, their level of preparation for their major is one of the key factors for admission. So it's 60 units, the English, the critical thinking, the math, and then the next tier is how well is this student prepared for his major. So I'd like to introduce that into the discussion.
Sure.
Deans are making these decisions.
I was calling up on my remote desktop thing on my PowerPoint, on my iPad, which worked, so I'm impressed by that. But in any event, so I didn't hear exactly everything that Dr. Bell had said previous, but I know that part of what we're doing is working closely with counseling and Betsy and Homa in identifying who the completers are as we go forward for this summer. And I think that topic is part of the discussion, the transfer major patterns, the transfer patterns. So I think if you went to Cynthia and talked to her about that, I know that Dr. Bell and Cynthia and others will be discussing this. Is that correct, Dr. Bell?
That's correct. And Dr. Olivo plays a major role in making sure that those items and those topics are brought forward to the table. She sits with the deans when we go through this planning.
Right.
So a large part of that will be advocated for and brought forward by Dr. Olivo.
Okay, great.
Well, now some of this discussion is going to continue when we get to the next item, the proposed changes in the enrollment priorities policy. But what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, Anna, is that the list that we are developing to give guidance to the deans and the administration needs to go a bit further in terms of what we prioritize for transfer.
That's correct.
Right. All right. Any other questions, though, for Dr. Bell? Okay. Then let's go on to item 4, the enrollment priorities policy. I believe that you have a paper version of the proposed changes, and you also received this electronically. Now again, we did receive 2 very recent recommendations from Shelley about some language in the proposed changes, and from Chris, and we'll get to those in just a moment. But I invited Dina to join us here today because, as I mentioned just a while ago, it's primarily the admissions and office that has to implement this. And Dina, as we were talking about this policy in our recent meetings, there were some things that we were not clear about, that we don't understand. So we're going to put you to the test. Sorry. The very first, just to let you know, there's a few minor changes on the first page, the policies page. At the very last sentence, I got a recommendation from a faculty member saying that we should add the words "an appeal" to student challenge, just to clarify that. But that's the only change that I've gotten for the policies. On the procedures, which begin on the second page, Dina, the very first item, item number 1 under the procedures, we're trying to figure out what it means. And I was wondering if you could provide us with your insight about that basic formula that it refers to in item A.
I know that the form completed, and maybe they started taking those classes, pre-82. Some of them may have started, 1990.
Right.
There might be a range of people who have taken classes for personal are in excess of even 100. And what happens is you see those same students circulating with high priority numbers semester after semester. And the other students who are really in need of taking these transfer level classes or classes for their certificate in AA can never really get to their priority time much higher up, simply because you have the resurging of these high priority numbers getting back into the system. And so based on this, I think what you're going to see is perhaps a shaving off of those students with high priority numbers, regardless of when they started here at the college, but trying to move them out of that high priority assignment and allowing some others that are in the pipeline to get up there a little closer and sooner.
All right, but I think that we should explain to the committee that the reason that we have the date of spring 1982 in the procedures is simply because our systems, our current Santa Rosa system, only goes back to 1982.
Early 80s, yes.
It's not able to capture any information about anyone prior to that date. Is that correct?
Right. The system was purchased in the early 80s that we've been on.
So it's just a limitation of our system.
Right.
But are you saying also that we could essentially do away with Section 1? I mean, would your office have sufficient guidance from these procedures if we were to eliminate all of the wording from Section 1?
I don't know if it would be appropriate to eliminate the wording altogether.
Okay.
I think that when students come in and they want to know how come they have a certain priority assigned to them, we want to be able to give them a rationale for it. And I think that even with the modification in the wording, it still gives us something to explain to them, in a sense, why this number was assigned. It wasn't just random.
Okay. All right. And any questions about that section from any of the committee members?
One question.
Yes, Ted.
By changing it from enrolled to completed, then we're allowing for repetitions of courses. They can have multiple failures in a course and take it.
They're limited to three attempts.
Dina?
They're limited to 3 attempts, so yeah. Pardon me?
I know they're supposed to be limited to 3. That also has changed over the years.
Well, again, they can appeal.
Yeah.
But I would say it's a fair statement to say that we're kind of tightening down on what the rationale behind the appeal would be. Basically because of the Board of Governors' position to hold to that, third attempt, we'll probably see more and more students, unless of extenuating circumstances, denied.
Although it was as many as 7, and now it's 3 with a possible appeal to 4.
Right.
Right. Although I should explain that completed units means occurs only when a student has successfully completed a course with an A, B, C, or a pass. So a withdrawal is not a completed unit, neither is a substandard grade.
Exactly my point.
Okay.
What I wouldn't want to see is, if there's not a tightening down like that, then students who can clog the system, already heard, with substandard grades and taking those seats
Right.
over and over and over.
Right. The substandard grades would not go into that cumulative units. Right. Glenna?
That's why I really want to find out if we can somehow get the system to know when they drop the class, if they're passing at the time of dropping. And my division especially is concerned with all these students needing A's, and they're getting a B and they drop because they want to take it the next semester, and that's clogging up too. We want them to be set back a year. If they, like, say organic is the biggest problem. They think they need an A in organic to get into med school. So they get to the place where they can drop and they're getting a B, but they want to drop. we need to flag those students and tell them, okay, now you're going to have to wait a year because we've got loads of students waiting to get into that class that could be successful and would be happy with their B. And we just really, I'm hoping the new system or the new AIS or however we do it can flag those kids, oh, you dropped, but you were getting a B. So you're not going to be able to get into it right away again.
Okay. Yes, Amy?
A couple things. To respond to Glenna, some students with a B might drop for another reason, you know. So you have to be
And
really
that's on
careful.
part of the appeal that I saw, you know, there's an appeal.
I don't want to generalize. Okay, so I'm unclear on the formula. The way I read it, it's 4 times the cumulative units completed. So if I finished 15 units successfully in one semester, or say 12, you know, I'm up to 48 or up to 60. That seems, why are we multiplying? Why isn't just the units completed?
I agree. I don't understand that.
Why isn't it just 100 units?
I'd
Right.
have to look into it because I'm not 100% sure either.
Let's
I know
change
that
it.
the old one,
Yeah.
the one that we're going by now also takes into account whether the student is in district or out of district. There's more to it than just this basic formula, I can tell you that much.
Well,
Okay.
I wouldn't want to submit this until we fix it, so it makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, we'll need to clarify the language in that section, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. So if we could go down now to Section 2. I heard back from a few of you about the prioritization that we discussed last time. And so if you would look at list A through J, and you will notice a few relatively minor changes, or at least I think of them as relatively minor. The first one, item A, it says first priority would go to continuing, and then I put in parentheses, and new, question mark, continuing DSPS, EOP&S, foster youth, active duty military, and veteran students. You may recall that I shared with you some time ago information from Title V regulations which stipulate that we do indeed have to give priority to DSPS, EOP&S, foster youth, and veteran students. The active duty military is our own discretion. My question, and I need to clarify this, is are we also able to put continuing and new students in these categories into the first priority item?
I can share with you that we currently can and do provide priority registration. The first batch of students would be new and continuing EOP&S, foster youth, active military and veterans, and to continuing DSPS. This was also a recommendation based on Dr. Yamauchi, who said that new DSPS students really aren't necessarily given priority in terms of the same as continuing DSPS students. And he indicated that they were actually in favor of not giving new DSPS students priority.
But you would differentiate between continuing and new DSPS students?
Continuing DSPS would be those students that are here in a semester and are continuing in the sequence, the next semester.
Okay.
New or re-entering would be those students that would be new to the college first time or re-entering after having been out a term or more.
Okay, all right. Okay, so we could make a modification moving the DSPS students, rather the new DSPS, but are there other thoughts from the committee members?
Why specifically I can understand that they wanted to make the change, but why the classification between new and continuing for just DSPS?
The way I understand it is that they're not, there's nothing that makes us give new DSPS students priority to the same point as the EOP&S, foster, and the veterans.
But it could be at local discretion?
It could be at local discretion, yes.
Okay.
For the sake of simplicity, and I think that there's no problem with it. I think it'd be good of us if we just include new and continuing DSP&S along with all the other the EOP&S, the veteran, foster care, et cetera.
I'm not opposed to that. I would like to defer to Dr. Yamauchi, because I don't know what his office, and his staff need to go through to
Okay.
identify a new student as eligible for DSPS. I don't know what the procedure and the length of time for them to qualify that student as DSPS prior to a registration cycle would be. So if I can, contact him and his office and find out what's involved, what ramifications it has in his area, and then
Okay.
make a recommendation
That's
based on that.
reasonable. But assuming that it can go forward from his perspective, are there any other concerns about that?
About that or the priority?
Including new and continuing DSPS. Other comments about the prioritization?
Yeah, this is where I wish we had a whiteboard, and we may need to bring one for the next meeting. So I'm going to just try something out based upon what I've heard at board meetings, what I've heard in discussions. A would continue as it is number 1. C would be part of number 1, and I don't know what we do with new either international or out of district. In other words, if revenue enhancement is a priority that we have, then we need to make sure that the F1 visa and out of state have some sort of priority in order to get them going. Shelley?
I have a question about D, or are you moving down to?
I'm moving down. I'm giving you kind of a new, I'm giving you Bob's list for what it's worth, but
Okay.
that's why I said I think a whiteboard would be helpful at some point. So that's 1A, international, so C would be part of 1. And then,
I'm sorry, you're going to put international.
as a revenue generation scenario, in other words,
That's not coming from this group, that's coming from...
Yeah, I'm just saying, that's what I've heard, that's what the board is interested in. We're trying to do revenue enhancements, and I know the international group has trouble finding spots sometimes. I don't know where they land on this, I just know that they have to be relatively high if our goal is to go from roughly 1,000 to 3,000 students who are revenue-enhancing people, as we try to get off the state situation as much as possible. And then where did I see the 12th grade? Yeah, item D would be 2, if you will, or next. New in-district residents who graduated from high school during the current calendar year and have been identified. So that would be next. Followed by continuing in-district residents. Followed by all other in-district students returning, or I guess it would be followed by continuing in-district, followed by all other. In other words, the concept here is to give, as much as possible, give our in-district students of whatever type higher priority than out-of-district people, other than our out-of-state and our international, as much as possible.
I'll recognize you in just a moment, but just to let you know that I had a discussion with Brock Klein this past week, and he indicates to me that the international students are going to form one of the first-year experience pathway cohorts.
Okay.
So I'm not exactly sure if they will all really be one of these pathway students, or if they will really have their own, need their own separate, distinct category.
That's a very good point. And if in fact the international program were to start out saying that they would have to be part of a first-year experience pathway, then you're right, we could do away with that. We'd still have to talk about the out-of-state students and whether or not they would have to be required as part of that pathway, but certainly that would be a great way to resolve that issue.
That's what I was going to suggest.
That's a great idea.
What we've been talking about. And
Yeah, that's what we've been
by creating
talking
it as a
about.
pathway, then you're not bumping in-district students. You've got a separate cohort going
Right.
through the pathway, and not just first-year experience, but an overall
Yeah.
pathway program.
I think that's a very elegant way of dealing
And
with that.
for clarity, before we continue, a student who participates in one of these pathway programs is basically guaranteed enrollment in those classes through 0 enrollments, rather than through the priority policy.
So in aggregate, other than what we are required by statute, by law to do, the other big philosophical point is in-district students, in whatever order we want to give them, and revenue enhancement in whatever order we want to give them. But again, if the revenue enhancement can be plucked into the first-year experience, that would be a great way to resolve that.
Okay, and now Anna, and then Chris.
Okay, I have two comments. On D in the draft, it says new in-district residents who graduated from high school and have been identified as first-year
Right.
pathway.
Right.
Now, my understanding is that pathways can only accommodate 1,000 students total. So not every incoming in-district student is going to fit into a pathway, nor do they want a pathway.
Well-
And secondly, we've got about 1,000 international students. So all of the international students cannot possibly fit into a pathway either. So I think D needs to be amended, and the pathways need to be addressed, because we've put together all these pathways this year, but we don't even know if they're successful. We don't know if the students are going to want to continue in them. Are they viable? Those are my questions.
We have a first-year experience council that is now up and going and looking at that, but you're right, Anna. This would imply that the college is going to create a first-year experience pseudo requirement for our incoming freshmen, whatever they are, to at least launch them correctly. Now, the pathway is a question in terms of what happens in the second year and going forward. But you're right, this would imply that in order for them to get the priority, they would have to be part of a pathway, which means that we would have to gear up. And if you recall the principles that we had for enrollment management, we talked about giving those pathways first priority as we build them out, as we build the schedule.
Chris?
So first, to clarify, basically your proposal is to move B down to after D.
B down to after D. Yeah, I guess that's correct. But again, it's the concept that maybe we should be thinking about here before we get into the nitty-gritty of this. And again, because we can go back to a whiteboard, and then really lay it out.
All right. My other, I suppose I can see that conversation happening later, but I do think that if we have these, like you say, these pathways are guaranteed enrollment through the pathway program, and they don't go through the system, then they shouldn't be included in these procedures.
What do you mean they don't go through the system?
If they aren't given a priority registration date, but are instead given classes specifically set aside to them, then they should have a separate set of procedures set aside for them, not be included within these procedures.
Because there are guaranteed spots, that they really don't need any prioritization.
Well, they simply don't go through this procedure, so they shouldn't be included within it.
In some ways, it's like, you're saying, I think, that they're like, say, the nursing students. I mean, nursing students are guaranteed a spot. We only have that many seats in the nursing classes. So prioritization for them is irrelevant because they're guaranteed those spots.
Except students are going to need to have a priority number anyway, because if it's an F1 student or whatever and they end up not doing the pathway, they're part of the general mix. And so you can't say they're out of it. They might enroll in a particular group of courses, but they still need to be addressed in the overall priorities.
Dave?
Also,
Sorry, Dave, and then Amy?
Dave, could you go to the lectern, because we need you on the mic.
Okay.
That's what I was going to say, because Charlie and I are creating pathways that match English and math, and then there's going to be the College 1 class, but then the student has to pick their GE class, so they do need some type of priority. Also, all the pathways don't look the same.
Right.
So
Okay.
there does need to be some priority.
Okay,
With
thank you.
that clarification, then I understand why they're in the procedure.
Okay. Right. But can I go back to the question about limitations of the pathways? Are we indeed limited to 1,000 enrollments?
At At the current time, that's what we're planning for the fall, based upon what we thought at the time. But again, if this were adopted for some implementation at a later date, we'd have to gear up, right, Dr. Bell? We'd have to gear up those pathways and provide more seats along those lines.
That's correct. And again, if we're looking at option of these for
Okay, and Shelley?
Yeah, I did, kind of following up with what Anna said, I'm a little bit concerned about high school graduates who make it here because of this priority list for the first year, and then in the second year, if they're not in a pathway program, or they just sort of down in this other group of students who maybe can't then get the classes they want.
Yeah,
In that case, they would just be regular continuing students.
Right, so, but are we creating another group of?
Well, as I was suggesting earlier, the next priority would be in-district continuing.
Okay.
So the point is they roll out of the pathway. Thanks, it's good clarification, Shelley, thank you.
That would be E then.
That's right, they roll out of the pathway if they can't continue, but they're in-district continuing. You know, we continue to have roughly 67% of the students at PCC who are out of district, and I think there's been a lot of concern the last several years about how do we save the seats for more of our in-district students.
And just to give you a little bit more information about the Pathways programs, again, in my discussions with Brock Klein this past week, he identified not only a pathway program for international students and math jam and so on that are being developed, but he included in the first-year Pathways programs like Puente, Ujima, and the Zone. So those would qualify as pathways.
Right, and there's the international group, and there's the design tech group, and there's a music one under discussion, and there's a STEM group coming in from the HSI STEM grant, and there's a music one that's developing. So, and again, the whole notion is to get people started well and hopefully help close that gap that we talked about, basically establish a completion gap and close that completion gap.
Well, see, now that brings up, okay, when you said Puente, I was the Puente coordinator counselor for many years, and a lot of our students are out of district. So they're down in item I. If it's a new out of district who's going to be in Puente, that student's going to have less priority than an in-district student going into Puente. That doesn't make sense.
Well, that's true. But what would happen, because the Puente students are also limited by virtue of zero enrollment, they would be guaranteed a spot, but they would not register until their time came up after the continuing students.
It might also suggest that from an outreach point of view, we would have to work within our district to try to find people who would, I would think we have plenty of students who would benefit in district in a Puente program or Ujima program, or Dina's nodding her head affirmatively, so we just would have to outreach accordingly.
I've got just a comment to tag along, and this doesn't happen very often, but as we're looking at high schools of origin, we do have some students that are attending our in-district high schools, but actually are out-of-state community residents.
Have to work our way
add
through
more
this.
to the mix.
Right. But this is saying in-district residents, right?
Right. But we do have students that are out-of-district residents who, for whatever reason, attend an in-district high school. They may live on the border, for example, of Temple City, and they're actually outside our district, but the way that Temple City High School, for example, might categorize their students, that student would go to Temple City. So they're part of our in-district high school group, but they're actually an out-of-district resident. So maybe in cases like that, that's where we can kind of...
Well, they would come under item I, would they not?
Right. We could fill them in through there.
Right. And again, still guaranteed a spot through the Pathways experience, but their registration would come later in the process.
Right.
Okay.
One other thing, Bob, you mentioned the issue of out-of-state students but not international, and I don't see anything about this, but I think we need to address that, because if we're looking at revenue enhancement issues,
Yeah.
same fees, they're out of state.
Dina, do you know, because it was asked of me the other day and I didn't have an answer, how many out-of-state, not F1s, but out-of-state registrants do we have at PCC, roughly?
Look, I don't know offhand.
Yeah, but you're right, Ted. We need to find out what that number is, and again, somehow lump them into this if in fact that's what we want to do.
Well, I think this is a very interesting discussion, and I don't mean to cut it short, but we are limited with time. So I'm going to ask you to forward to me any recommended changes that you have for Section 2, and then we'll discuss this further at our next meeting. Let's go on to item, we have Section 3, then Section 4. And Chris, this is the section that you would like to address, and you brought to us a paper, handwritten paper with your recommendations. Do you want to review that now?
Yeah, no problem. So my recommendation would be to add a new Section 4 that would go before the current Section 4, or the current change Section 4, directly after the red, basically. That would address the process, which basically says that each individual case would be taken throughout the appeals process, and that will really specify for students, especially in D, but I think throughout all of them, who may be taken away. Specifically for D, things like, so the first I, these are 4 possible reasons that a student might lose their priority for one of the reasons, Section 3. There are others, I'm sure, but these are the ones that really came to mind. I, if they're at 101 units and they only need 1 class left to transfer, they shouldn't lose their priority. A change in students' ed plan within their tenure, if perhaps they decided to change their major, and actually I made a couple revisions to that myself today to change it instead of a change in their ed plan, but they're changing their ed plan and progress to their new goal while at PCC. The students' reasons for enrolling in their classes, including the availability of core classes, their need for full-time unit status. Many students have to take electives because they can't get into the classes that they wanted to, so they may lose their priority just because they couldn't get into the classes they wanted because they didn't have priority. And then for IV, the idea of any personal, professional, or economic issues that resulted in the cause of their priority loss. Sometimes just you may be on academic probation because you had to go out of town to attend to your father's funeral, et cetera, there are personal issues that I think could also be taken into account on an individual basis. And then finally, D, the students who are unable to appeal or who are unable to repair their situation will go to the end of their, in my opinion, I think that they should go to the end of their category as outlined in Section 2. Not go to after J, or for example, but go to, if they're within C, then go to the end of all of those within C.
Comments, questions for Chris?
I'm going to try to approach it from the other side of the horse here.
Yeah.
What could we do to encourage students to, and I'm not opposed to what you said, I'm trying to think of how we can accommodate it. How would we go about ensuring that students have sufficient time to identify whatever their goal is here, whatever they're here to do, whatever that is, and to be able to accommodate those students in a timely fashion to get those courses so that they can move on with their life? How, from a student perspective, could the college then be able to accommodate that student identifying their goal so that the appropriate educational plan or pathway or whatever term you want to use is provided to that student to guarantee that student the courses that they're going to need in order to get out and accomplish their goal in a timely fashion?
In response to that, I don't know, and we don't have that now. And that's, I think, one of my main issues with this entire document, and one of the kind of reasons for this is because the first step is to identify these students. If we don't have the ability to identify these students, then we shouldn't have a procedure saying that we are going to limit them. limit their access. And I think that we not only need to identify them, but also be able to reach out to those students. And until we have that infrastructure in place, I don't know if this is something that we should be doing at all. But as far as I know, we don't have that ability right now, and something that I think we're moving towards, but we certainly don't have it now. And I think that it's certainly feasible that an upgraded technology system would be able to take that into account, as with the correct knowledge of what's going on. I mean, obviously we want to digitize every student's ed plan, and there'll probably be some sort of automatic trigger that says, oh, the student's no longer on their ed plan, whatever it is. That would then, and I just want to make sure that automatic trigger doesn't become an automatic loss of priority without someone reviewing what happened.
Dave?
I agree, but at the same time, last time we met, I believe one of you two showed what Long Beach was going to be doing as far as their priority, their new priority registration, and it was effective for either 13-14 or 14-15, but they had taken the time in advance to lay out all of the different pieces, and I suggest that that's how this should be seen, as this might not go into effect for the 12-13 year, but we can lay the foundation for what is going to be the priority system in the future.
Pending also our upgrade in technology. Bob?
And I would echo that. We don't yet know what the technology can do, and I'd be concerned about putting something in the procedures that we have no clue as to whether or not we'll be able to implement. And I know Dr. Bell has been very conservative on his staffing requests and needs, both in student services, and I think you're being so, because until you know what the technology is going to be able to do, then you'll know how to restructure and ask for additional, assignments or whatever.
That's correct. We fully anticipate that once the new AIS is put into place, it's going to dictate that the staff within the admissions and records and enrollment services do their jobs differently and at a higher level of functionality. So rather than replace staff on current functionality, knowing that we'll be going to a new wave, we're going to hold on that until we get the new AIS system in place, find out exactly what those jobs will be, and then place people in those corrected positions.
Anna?
So then, based on that, I would recommend the removal of that statement, 3A. Least priority goes to students who are identified as not following their ed plan. Because right now, we do not have the capability to track that. I think that in a year or two, when we have the AIS system about to be implemented, we could reinsert that. But right now, I don't think it's wise to include that statement in this procedure.
Nor C.
And it is important to know that the procedure should be more flexible than the policy. We should be able to revisit the procedures periodically as we need to, with changing staff, changing technology, and so on, and bring these up to date every once in a while. Is there a consensus? Anna, are you proposing that are you moving that?
I'd like to propose the removal of item 3A on the draft revisions to policy 4020.
Is there a second?
I'll second and add that I think C is also unfeasible at this time.
Let's deal with A.
Let's deal with A.
But I will second the removal of 3A.
Okay. All right. So there's a motion and a second. Is there a comments, questions? Shelley. Shelley.
Well, I would have the comment that there's more things than just that one that we cannot currently track. We cannot currently track any CTE student, however far along they may be in a path. And there's probably other things that we can't track that might be in here. I don't know how we would encompass all of those.
Well, whether a student is in a CTE program or a transfer program or something else, they would all form part of an education plan.
Right.
So they would all be covered within that category.
If we're just talking about A.
Right,
I mean.
3A. Any others? Ted?
All I was going to say is, assuming we're talking about removing this just because of the technical difficulties, but it's something that we definitely would want to have back in as soon as it's feasible, right?
I think that's a consensus.
And along those lines, if there were things in the procedure that was not technically feasible right now, but it provided a direction to go in, I guess we really wouldn't want to put anything in that we knew that we couldn't deal with now, or if we put something in that we have a question about, we might put in parenthetically, to implement in 13, 14 or something like that. Basically say it wouldn't be implemented right away, but it's a direction that we would want to go in. I mean, I guess we could do it that way too, since it's a procedure, right?
When we would have appropriate data.
When we have appropriate data and technology and everything else. That's another way to address that, I guess.
Chris?
In counter to that, just the parliamentarian in me just feels that we shouldn't have those kind of dates in policies and procedures, because 5 years from now, they're going to look back 10 years from now and be all like, why was that date in there? The same thing with the spring 1982, and it'll just cause confusion. These kind of don't want to have that kind of temporary status.
That's true, but the accreditation standards require us to update these things every 6 years anyway, so, but I see your point. Anyway, it was just a thought.
Dina?
This is just a comment for thought. Is there a possibility of putting anything in place that would be kind of a marker for us? So, for example, we would say, students with X amount of units, or students who exceed, 60 units and do not, follow their ed plan, or, check with counseling, or some kind of marker along the way?
Well, I think we're getting to that in item 3D. Least priority would also go to students who accrue more than 100 units, not including ESL or basic skill courses.
But I'm thinking even wider than that. So,
Wider?
for example, with some of the things we're looking at now, students that have, for example, 60 units or more, and don't have an English or a math, or something in place that says, okay, at a certain time at PCC, when you hit 60 units, if you haven't gone to counseling or haven't had an evaluation, that's the marker that we need to check to see, are you still on track with your ed plan? Are you missing classes that you need to complete your goal? What's the halfway point? If we're saying, 100 units, at 50 units, is there, do we put a procedure in place where the student has to check in, if you will?
Well, then items 3C, students who fail to declare a program of study after 30 units completed at PCC.
So would that be the point that some of the other things could fall into place in?
The other point, if I may add, is that the thing about 3 that struck me as valuable was that it made it very clear to students and to the system what would result in least priority. So if you were concerned about your priority, you would try to make certain that you didn't fall victim to any of 3A through D. If we don't have it, in this case red and white, but if we don't have it in black and white, then it results in a system that is, again, more amorphous, and we're trying to get away from that. We're trying to get more specific so that we can encourage people to have a plan.
Chair, in the interest of time, I'll call the question.
Okay. So then all in favor of removing the current wording for item 3A, please raise your hand. All opposed? 1. Okay, thank you. So we will remove that wording for now. All right, and then for today's meeting, we also had a recommendation from Shelley. It's on a yellow sheet of paper. And Shelley, if I understand your recommendation, you're requesting a change on the 3rd page to item 6. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you have one of 3.
Sentence that introduces the alphabetic list, the first alphabetic list. I'd like to see some greater clarity on that sentence, and I
Oh.
have three here that I'm proposing that we might
Okay,
use, or, I think I liked the third one the best,
okay.
but
Okay, so this would be in addition to the sentence where it says, greatest priority shall be given to the following, colon, and then
in place of that.
in place of that entire,
Yeah.
okay. All right, and do you want to tell us why you favor the third one?
Just so it was clear that that this was not a rank order.
All right, so the suggested change reads, greatest priority shall be given to the following types of courses which are considered to have equal priority status and will be distributed or offered according to student demand. Right. Okay, other comments, questions? Chris?
I'll move to change the wording to the third option as provided by Shelley.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, seconded by Bob Bell.
So just a point of clarification.
Okay.
So that would be the introductory statement, but A through D would still be listed, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask a point of clarification? Do we have a way to measure student demand?
Well...
Yes, we have a new AIS system, I guess.
Well, and there's also the recent data that's been provided to the deans, which is two sets of information. One, the course-taking behavior by division in terms of what are the, over a 3-year period, what have been the quote-unquote, what have been the classes that have been taken the most by students within that division. And then in relation to AS, the transfer stuff. And then we also have the 25 top and the 50 top course-taking behavior classes over a 3-year period. So we have that data for whatever that data is worth.
Ted?
That's not really student demand, that's enrollments. And I mean, I know within my division, Spanish 1 was up there because I offer the largest number of sections of Spanish 1, and there's no prerequisite, so everybody comes into it. We've talked many times over the past few years about trying to track attempted enrollments, for example, to give you an idea of where students are trying to get into. I think I agree, I think it's polemic to be talking about student demand. We can't really pin that down at this point, and I'm not sure, some of that becomes self-fulfilling. And again, if I have a lot more Spanish 1, I'm going to get a lot more students in there.
Well, and some of this goes back and speaks to the educational master plan from the environmental scan data that exists there, but also incumbent upon the divisions to basically figure out ways with the Office of Institutional Effectiveness to try and determine what that demand could be.
Bob?
I agree. I don't think we have a true way to do it, and this is hardly scientific what I'm about. That derive from waiting lists, because our waiting lists, in my opinion, clearly suggests an area where students have a demand. And if you will, if the world were perfect, if we could create all classes from all of those waiting lists, I think we would in fact be moving. And that's hardly scientific, but that's one way to begin to look at it, I think.
That goes back, I mean, it's valuable, that's important information. It does reflect some of the attempts, but if every section of Spanish 1 has a waiting list of 15, they're all maxed out, I can't really see that point. I just personally, I'm a little bit more comfortable with
the middle one.
With the middle one.
The middle one would stop at status and not have the rest of that.
Yeah, and then as far as addressing student demand, that's something, as Bob Miller just said, yeah, we have to work on that and come up with a way in which to address that at the division level or the departmental level or whatever it is, but not necessarily within these procedures right now.
Okay.
In that case, I will withdraw my motion.
Okay.
How about a friendly amendment to go with the second one?
Substitute the
So
second one?
much easier, just withdraw it.
Important to have in there.
Yeah.
One of these is important to have in here, Ted just says, so.
Yeah, well, I continue to believe that 3 is the right way to do it because it's, however we get to measuring student demand, I think that we have to be cognizant of student demand. And so maybe we don't have the best way of getting our arms around it yet, but I think we've begun that process. By getting this in writing, we'll know we have to figure out ways to get that measured, particularly in many of the CTE areas, I think, and go from there. I just think clarity is better.
Okay, so where are we with this? So
currently, there's no motion on the floor, so I guess I'll make a second motion. I'll motion to replace the wording with the second option.
Second that.
a motion and a second to adopt the second recommendation from Shelley Gaskin. All right, any other comments or questions about the second recommendation, the second wording phrase? Reads, greatest priority shall be given to the following types of courses which are considered to have equal priority status. Any comments or questions? Anna?
Well, so this is in item 6 before the ABCD classes.
Correct.
And I'm going back to my comment earlier where we have a lot of classes that are transferable and articulated for majors, but those aren't captured in this ABCD.
So you will also want to insert some other wording into the list, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, but let's go back to the question though. The adoption of that second item that Shelley is recommending. Any other comments or questions about that? All right, all in favor, please raise your hand. Unanimous. Thank you. All right. And Anna, now you have a recommendation of an item to add?
Well, I don't know if it would be E.
What
somewhere.
would the wording be?
Courses that are transferable and articulated for majors commonly pursued by PCC students.
That, please.
Courses that are transferable and articulated for majors that are commonly pursued by PCC students.
Okay. All right, any, to make a motion to insert that language?
I'd like to make a motion to insert that language in item 6.
Okay. All right, and since they would be of equal priority status, we've already determined that, we could just add item E. And is there any discussion, comments, or questions?
I would say that I would support that on the basis of the job placement item in our completion agenda, where we have people here who just come to take a few classes and they need to complete. I know that you were talking about something else, but if we have a completion agenda of degrees and transfers and what have you, I think that just strengthens it. I think it's fine. It also helps with the job placement scenario as well.
Dave?
A possible concern might be and again, this comes back to our AIS technology issue, that there might be 30 courses that would fall into this definition, but until we have the AIS, we wouldn't know necessarily what the actual demand for those 30 courses. It may very well be that out of those 30 courses that would fit that particular agenda, between 2 and 5 of them are the ones that 90% of students would take to fill that. And so I believe that this possibly will end up deflating the power of prioritizing classes. Meaning, if we start with 1,900 courses and we end up prioritizing 1,800 of them,
right,
we're in the same boat.
Well, that gets back to the student demand question, because the students, by virtue of what they enroll in, give us a good sense of what it is that they're interested in.
Ed, did you have a comment?
I was going to comment on talking about transferable and articulated for majors commonly pursued.
to have the commonly pursued, or just that these are, if they're majors that are articulated for transfer and
Well, there are many, many, many. But the common ones, let me just give you an example of business. We have, Dina might know, many of our students are business majors transferring to the Cal States. Those students need accounting 1AB,
Right.
business law, a computer class. Those do not appear on the general ed packages. So if we just prioritize general ed, those key classes that business major needs may not be offered. When that student applies to transfer, he or she's not going to be a good candidate because he's lacking key courses for his major. So my intent is just to preserve those classes that the students really need.
feel. That's my feeling about that. Through CNI, we've created a major. We don't want to accidentally be leaving off I'm concerned with the idea of saying, only those that are commonly pursued, because, if we have the major, we need to support it, or we don't have the major.
Dina?
Well, I mean, there are ways for you to get data from UC and CSU about the top majors that our students are transferring under, and that could narrow it down a bit. Ed makes a good point. We do have a lot of majors that are articulated that won't come up in those top 30 or top 40.
And I think that should be addressed in terms of whether or not we have that major, and that goes through CNI.
Right.
And it's to the IEC, to the Institutional Effectiveness Committee that work,
They make recommendations about that as well.
Right.
But if, as an institution, we're offering a major, and students coming in and they're starting that major and they're going down that path, if we don't offer the classes for them to be able to complete it, then we're in breach of contract with the students, essentially.
Which is why this thing can't be all-inclusive, because we won't be able to. We can't provide everything everybody needs.
So let's see, there was a motion and a second. We didn't take a vote, did we?
No.
Motion was, Mr. Chairman, the motion was never seconded, so I'll do that for you now.
Okay. All right, so it's been seconded. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor of this proposed item E, adding it to the procedures, please raise your hand. All opposed? And it passes unanimously as well. So I'll revise the policy and procedures and bring you that
I have
revision.
one question, doesn't need an answer right now, but
Okay.
I don't understand the difference on the policy, and maybe I should. Superintendent and President shall establish procedures defining enrollment priorities, limitations, and processes for student challenge and appeal. What's the difference between a challenge and an appeal?
One's more formal?
Okay.
That's more formal?
Which one? The appeal is more
I
formal?
would say appeal is more formal.
So a challenge means they go to the counselor, and who do they challenge and who do they appeal to? The challenge is to their faculty member and their dean, as opposed to appeal that goes to student services? I mean, I'm just speculating. I don't know the difference between the two terms.
Like a prerequisite challenge is a form to fill out. It's a more simple process, and then if they don't like the response from that, then they can petition.
If we were going to talk about hierarchical, a challenge would be I like the way this is sounded, lower level.
Okay. So there really are two things, a challenge and an appeal. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So you can see the last item is future meetings. The next one is on the 26th. So please put that on your calendars. Shelley?
I just have one final comment. I teach and write about data visualization, and I just want to say that this chart was excellent.
Thank you.
I think the more we can see what's happening is very helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. We were particularly proud of that one, too. Thank you, Shelley.
You'll get an A.
No, yeah, because every once in a while you actually create something that really does tell a story.
Anna?
I'd like to add something to the agenda for the next meeting. At the last meeting, I mentioned that in the UC system, they have a certain enrollment prioritization. And I did some research with a colleague at UCLA, and I have a printout of how it's written on the website for all students to understand. It's very clear. And I'd like to have this on the agenda for next
Okay.
meeting.
We'll put it as a discussion, and if you have an electronic link to that, I'll be glad to send it out to the committee members.
Yes, I'll send it to you.
Okay. All right, anything else for today? All right, thank you, Dina, for coming and being with us, and we'll be in touch.
And actually, I'd love Dina to be here as often as possible, since she answers really good questions for us.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.
Right, but his point
That's
is.
what
what
very
he
easy to
did
look at that and think that's a ranked order.
Right, that kind of disturbs me.
And
before that,
Both my daughters.
or somewhere.
address these issues at different times. Great
I think that could be extremely helpful.
acronym in them of it.